everyone. Thank you very much for your patience. We'll go ahead and get started with this morning's informational briefings. I know we've had, we're halfway through the week. That's always a positive thing. So thank you, members, for hanging in there with us as we go through quite the series of briefings with all of our departments and various agencies. We definitely appreciate it, and definitely will put us in a good position to start the legislative session, understanding all the various requests that come before us. So this morning we'll be getting started with the DHHL. So Jobie, Director, if you want to come before us and provide testimony.
Chair Takuda, members of the committee, thank you very much for the time to provide background on our budget request for this biennium. I did want to introduce some of our commissioners that are in the audience with me. Commissioner Bill Richardson from Oahu, Ren Westcoat, also from Oahu, and Commissioner Pua Canto from the island of Maui. So they, along with myself, serve as the policy head of the commission. If I may get started, we provided to you our written testimony, and so what I would like to do is walk through the written testimony, just summarize the salient points, and then talk specifically to the tables and some specific issues that we want to bring to the committee's attention. The first thing I wanted to say is that we are very grateful to this body. In the last year, the department has received the highest level of funding for general funding in the history of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, nearly double what we had ever received before. And so we want to thank the legislature for that funding. I think that has made a profound difference for the department and will set the trust in a different, trajectory. It's one of these critical turning points for DHHL. Because of the Nelson litigation, we are a very unique agency. When the Supreme Court in 2012 found, when that decision came down, since that point in time, we have actually been submitting to this body what we label a sufficient sums budget. That's based on the advice of our counsel that we be sure to do our fiduciary obligation because we were remiss in asking of this body what the department feels is sufficient to meet the purposes under the Constitution. So we will be talking to that budget, but also we recognize that the commission does not have the burden that you have as legislators or the governor has as an executive to balance all of the needs of the state against the very limited resources that are available. So we also will be spending some time specifically on the governor's budget request on behalf of the department, and then take any questions that you may have. So just starting, many of you are very familiar, but just to lay the groundwork for those that are watching as well as those in the audience, the Department of Hawaiian Homeland's mission is to manage the Hawaiian Homelands Trust effectively and to develop and deliver land to Native Hawaiians. Specific to our program and our unique nature comes from the requirement in the Admissions Act that made the administration of this program and the trust responsibilities for this program a part of the condition of statehood. So I just want to read paragraph 2. As required by the Admissions Act and as a compact with the United States, the state of Hawaii and the people of Hawaii adopted the act as a provision of the state constitution and agreed to faithfully carry out the spirit of the act for the rehabilitation of the Hawaiian race. And these responsibilities still remain. So that kuleana doesn't only vest with the department, it actually is a kuleana of the state and all of the citizens of Hawaii. I included for your consideration an analysis of the number of lots that, from a statewide perspective, we should be producing. Because as we've talked to legislators, we've been asked, I think it's a very fair question as to how are we doing in terms of our production? What is the legislature getting for its money? And so the Hawaii Housing Finance Development Corporation just completed, as of December, this study called the Hawaii Housing Planning Study. Oh, hang on, let me take a step back. In terms of our mission, we're very familiar with the mission to develop and deliver lands to Native Hawaiians, but what's less familiar is our obligation to manage the trust lands effectively. And so we wanted to share with you, in terms of our land inventory, the magnitude of the lands that actually are going to remain in DHHL's inventory. So that's actually Table 1 on page 2 of our testimony. When you look at that, of the 203,000 acres that's in our inventory, approximately nearly half of that, or over half of that, is in lands that we will never be able to get out of our inventory, or are going to be in our inventory at least for the next 20 years. That's a substantial obligation on our department to manage those lands in a way that is effective. And we face many of the same issues that other large landowners like DLNR, like Kamehameha Schools, private and public, in terms of the land management issues for those properties, trespassing, fire protection, dumping, all of that. So we just wanted to bring to this body's attention that in addition to homesteading, this obligation to manage these trust lands is a part of our mission, and it's becoming an increasingly larger percentage of our share of resources or demands on our staff. So talking then now about the Hawaii Housing Policy Study, that study, which was just completed, Hawaii Housing Planning Study, indicated that they looked at the number of units that were going to be needed, and specifically where our sweet spot has been in affordable home ownership. So I wanted to look at those numbers to compare how our production figures are looking. And based on that study, they were saying that of the 24,551 housing units that are going to be needed, about 9,074 they felt would be needed for single-family ownership, and that's over a 5-year period from 2016 to 2020. When you take in a proportion of that based on our estimated households that are eligible for the Hawaiian homelands, that's both those those that are on the waiting list, as well as those that we think are part of our community, and that's about 67,721 households. It's about 15% of the state. So Table 2 identifies those 9,000 units based on, broken out by the HUD income classifications. Generally speaking, 80% and below are the programs, or the income group that's eligible for federal programs. And then the second bar indicates the number of units that would be needed per year for the whole state. And then it takes an additional cut as to our fair share that we should be producing, at least in this bar of single-family units. So if we were to meet all of the demands of the income groups as this policy paper has indicated, we should be producing about 272 units every year. In order to do that, the pipeline has to be primed. And for us, we translate that into lots because we are increasingly moving towards vacant lot awards at the request of our beneficiaries, so that the families can build the homes that are suit their family needs, their income, how big their family is, etc. So what we're looking at for our purposes is the lot production to try to make sure that we're hitting this target. Commissioner Wren at Westcoast had said that this was actually the lead, and I should have started with this. But for this year, calendar year 2016, we completed, or are near completion, 374 lots. And so those will be either ready for award or awarded. So we started with Waimanalo, 45 lots. We were able to award 31 of them. We anticipate East Kapolei, 160 lots, Le'iopuakona, 118 lots. Those are actually completed. And Anahola, Pi'ilani Maikekai, an additional 51 lots. We've been asked several times to look at as many options as possible to increase and enhance the affordability of our product for our families. So of that lot production, we are actually out for a request for proposal for a rent with option to purchase partner to assist us with the Kona project. And those proposals are actually being under review with departmental staff. And then the second issue is that we still, in certain markets, there is a demand for our turnkey product. So we are out looking for a developer for the East Kapolei for a portion of those units. Because we've been moving to vacant lot awards, we're able to get lots that have been sitting in our inventory out the door as well. So in addition to the lots that were completed, the new lots, we anticipate awarding an additional 38 lots within the next calendar year, 22 lots in January, and then another 16 for Lanai. It's a little bit more challenging for Lanai because finding contractors, those kinds of issues, it's a very small island, is a little bit more challenging, but we are dedicating staff resources to try to assist with the award of those lots. So altogether, in addition, we are converting the one rent with option to purchase project that's been done on the homelands. It has now reached the point that it can convert to home ownership. So those are 70 units, housing units in Kapolei. The selling price, I believe, is between $75,000 and $80,000 or somewhere around there for a 3-bedroom home in Kapolei. So altogether, we're looking at 482 either lots that have been completed or will be converted, or will be considered for a rent with option to purchase, which is about 75% over DHHL's fair share for based on the production figures. To sustain this level of activity, of course, we need to make sure that the pipeline is primed and that there's reliable funding that's coming to the department. I did want to highlight some of the challenges that we face in meeting this homesteading program, and some of them, you may be familiar with them. The first is we can only develop where we have lands. And so while our demand on Oahu is the largest for residential, our longest list is 10,000 for the island of Oahu, we only have 3.3% of our lands here. The challenge also is that people don't necessarily know, the individuals on our waiting list, where our lands are, and so they may be waiting for a location like Mililani that we don't have any homelands and we're never going to develop. So we can only develop where we have lands. Most of our land holdings are on the neighbor islands. The vast majority, half of our lands are on the Big Island, Hawaii, Maui, Kauai. Those are mostly where our lands are. The second challenge we have is, while we have a very long list, 23,000 plus individuals representing about 44,000 applications, not all of them are really interested at this point in time to live on the homelands. So I took a closer look, and this was a discussion point last year with the committee, at the number of individuals, the group that they don't respond at all. And it's, in the last 5 years, it's been about 85% that don't respond at all to the department's correspondence. We don't know why, because they don't respond. So we're working with maybe 15% of the list, of which at any given time, maybe 5% is really engaged with us in terms of getting on to the homelands. So when you look at the numbers, 15% represents about 3,571. So maybe on the upside, you're talking between 15 and 20% that's actually really interested in engaging with the department at this time. The other 85%, it could be a whole host of reasons. It could be that they're just not ready at this point in time. They're waiting for their children to be of age to receive a homestead. They may not like the location. The mail just gets tossed out. And in many cases, we can't find the applicants. They've moved and they have not communicated to us where they've moved to. So we are definitely looking at every way we can to reach out, to improve the way that we work with this list, because it is very cumbersome. But I did want to bring that to the committee's attention. As I mentioned earlier, in order to keep that pipeline primed, one of the most important aspects for us is having a reliable stream of funding that we know is going to be there, so that we can plan with that money. And in addition, our beneficiaries can plan as well. When we say something's going to be done in 5 years, there's some certainty that it's actually going to be done if we have the funding that's coming with that. And then the last kind of major issue that I wanted to bring to the committee's attention is that we just have competing needs that are not as well known, but draw a significant amount of resources as well. One has to do with maintaining and repairing our existing infrastructure, and we want to thank this body for providing resources to DHHL over the last fiscal year, almost $13 million, to help us address ground zero for us, which is the Papakolea sewer situation. Our goal is to repair this infrastructure and get it over to the county, because they actually have the legal responsibility to take on maintenance of these infrastructure items. Roads and sewers, those are the critical aspects that, as long as it's our inventory, it's taking resources away from the trust that we could be using to get people onto the land. The second issue that was actually highlighted fairly recently, and we wanted to bring again forward to the legislature's attention, is that we actually function as a water utility. We don't do it very well, but we do it. We run 3 public water systems. The largest is on the island of Molokai, almost 600 meters, serving approximately 1,800 individuals, including the schools and the airport. We also have a water system in Anahola and a water system on the 2 water systems on the Big Island, one of which is actually regulated by the Department of Health. So those additional responsibilities do pull resources away from DHHL in terms of addressing our core mission of homesteading. To try to support our progress, given these challenges, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that the department is looking at. The first is to open up our ag lands. We're looking at a new ag award product called a subsistence ag lot. It's still a very large lot, but it's intended to allow for a family to reside, particularly on the neighbor islands on these lands, and to develop them at a lower infrastructure, ag standard roads, catchment systems, overhead electrical, so that we can open these lands up on the neighbor islands and get them out to beneficiaries. On every island but Oahu, our agricultural list is actually longer than our residential list. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to eliminate the barrier of not being financially ready to take a homestead. We have resurrected, and we started this in 2013, and it is now in full swing, the Hale program, which supports families. We do workshops initially and then very intensive case management to get our families ready when the awards are happening so that they can either take an award that's a turnkey or build their own home. And then the last thing, of course, as I mentioned, is the support of the legislature to help us address the repair and maintenance issues on the homelands. The additional 3 items that were also achievements under 2016 that I just wanted to highlight that was not homesteading. Number 1, the Kamakana Ali'i Shopping Center in Kapolei is now open. That, if it cash flows the way it's supposed to, in year 11 of the lease will be very lucrative for DHHL. The early years are not as, because they're building up in terms of getting the people in, the tenants in. But the opening so far has been, I think, very positive, especially the hotel. We've heard very positive comments about that. The second thing is we completed the South Point Resource Management Plan. This has been a point of criticism, and legitimate, fair criticism, that the department has not focused energies on its South Point lands. And so we finally were able to work in completing this management plan with a lot of engagement of that community, which we were very happy about. Now it comes to the hard part, which is execution of the plan. And then the last thing was we hosted really a Puvalu conference, inviting all of our Homestead Association leaders, nearly 55 of them, to talk about the needs of their particular communities. We wanted to include that as part of our sufficient sums budget ask, and so it is part of this package so that you can see what the communities are feeling are important for their particular jurisdictions. When we did this assignment with them, we asked them to look at it from the standpoint of what could be done in a 2-year time frame. In terms of our federal funds, the NAHASDA program, I want to say that the good news is that we have been successful in expending resources. In 2015, as I think I testified to last year, the department expended the highest level in the history of the program, $14.1 million. In 2016, we expended 11.7, and so far in 2017, halfway through, we've spent 9.3 million expended. This is out the door. We do still have a large balance, not as large as it was in November of 2015. It was 55.5 million. The balance we have now is 38.9. So we believe we have enough resources to carry us through programmatically. However, looking down the road, we are very concerned, primarily for 2 reasons. One is that the entire NAHASDA program itself, all titles, currently is not authorized, and the prospect of getting it authorized is unclear coming into this Congress, especially for programs that address Native Hawaiian issues. The second issue for us is although we are very, very thankful that Senator Schatz was able to secure $5 million in the budget for this program, that was not actually finalized. So we don't currently have any funding appropriation for the NAHASDA for the current fiscal year that we're in. So those two concerns are definitely, they are very real concerns, and we are working not only with our congressional delegation, but also with our trade organization, the National American Indian Housing Council, to do everything we can to secure passage of NAHASDA reauthorization for Native Hawaiians. Let me turn now to the sufficient sums budget request. I'm going to start with page, I do want to actually talk about the order so that you can understand a particular issue that we're dealing with, and that order starts on page 7. The original order was amended by Judge Castagnetti. There are orders both against the state of Hawaii as well as the commission. So there's two in particular that I do want to highlight because it does factor into the governor's budgetary request. So the second order, in number 2, says the state of Hawaii must fulfill its constitutional duty by appropriating sufficient general funds to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands for its administrative and operating budget, so that the department need not rely on revenue directly or indirectly from general leases to pay for these expenses. So that's the first order, that we shouldn't have to rely on our general lease revenues. And then the order number 4, item number 4 was, prior to 2012, the DHHL defendants breached their trust duties by failing to take all reasonable efforts, including filing suit, to obtain all the funding it needs for its administrative and operating budget. I did confirm with our counsel that this order actually is in effect. There was no stay of the order. And so it was a game changer for DHHL and for the commission, because now we're held to a higher standard in terms of trying to secure this funding. So when we talk about this, so I mentioned that because I want to come back to it as it relates to the governor's ask. Let me talk to the sufficient sums budget, which starts on page 9. And so that you have an understanding as to how this budget, the methodology, the thought process behind establishing the budget. I start just with a definition of sufficient from the dictionary, the Merriam-Webster dictionary, which defines sufficient as, quote, enough to meet the needs of a situation or a proposed end. So we have tried to work on this budget to get our what the department feels it would need if we were able to implement DHHL's programs and deliver its services to its beneficiaries at a level that is adequate in its quality. So in my mind, it's like doing B services that are at a B level, like if you're grading, versus where we are now, which is probably about C- on a good day, maybe less on a standard day. Not for lack of effort of the staff, let me just say it. I have a staff that works extremely hard, but just the size of the mission and what we have. So based on that assumption, if we just talk about positions, we've asked for 260 positions because that's where we want to be transparent as to the target we're working towards. We know that where we are at 200 positions, given our vacancy count as well as how the state's processes in terms of bringing people on, that's extremely aggressive to expect that we would fill our vacancies and establish and fill an additional 60 positions. But we're trying to set the target so that we can work towards that, so you know what we're working towards. Based on that staffing level, the other 3 purposes, lots, loans, and rehabilitation projects, assume that we have a staffing level of 260, as well as the other current expenses that are necessary. So at the bottom of page 9, it outlines our request for sufficiency for both fiscal years, and you'll note that under the department's definition, we also include the costs associated with repair and maintenance of the existing infrastructure. The operating side, which is current expenses of about $3.6 million, as well as the capital improvement side, and these are deferred items that have been deferred continually, so they have now become a capital improvement expenditure. We've included for the committee's review, as well as for the staff review, the detail behind these particular asks. On page 10, it includes the asks for the remaining purposes that are really under the legislature's purview to define what is sufficiency. So we have the amounts for lot development, loans, and rehabilitation projects. As I indicated earlier, as part of our Puvalu discussion, we've incorporated that ask of the communities in our rehabilitation projects. And again, for the committee's consideration, we've included the detail in our testimony so that you can see where the numbers are. And if you have any questions about that, either today or throughout the session, we'll be more than happy to respond to that. Let me turn specifically now to the governor's budget, and I'm going to work from table 2 of our testimony because I think it explains our issue probably most effectively. So if you look at table 2, and I'm looking at the fiscal year 2018 ask, you'll see that under Act 124/16, there was $18.254 million that was appropriated to DHHL in general funds. In addition, there's another $4.824 million in special funds, and this special fund is actually the fund that is the department has that is funded with the general lease revenues that are earned off of the homelands. What the governor's ask includes is it's the 18.24 plus the 6.8 million, which is actually our fringe. And so that's the first thing that is of a concern to the department, which is it's extraordinary that the fringe is funded in our budget, but it is, for a total ask of 25.1 million. The second issue is, and I do want to say that we actually had this conversation with the governor and with Budget and Finance, and I had hoped that we could resolve this before coming to this body, because I do understand that it makes it more challenging when an agency is having some issues with the budget that's put before this body by the governor. But where our challenge is that 4.824 million of special funds, there's a difference between Budget and Finance's definition of what's administrative and operating expenses and what the court's definition of administrative and operating expenses are. So what BNF has done is funded those object codes that there is a discrepancy out of our special funds. But what this creates for us is a challenge, because we have a court order, as I indicated in the earlier part of our testimony, that if we spend our special funds that are generated with general lease revenues for these object codes that we don't have funded, we will be in violation. And then we have to pursue, taking all reasonable efforts, that resource, including potentially filing suit. So we're in this dilemma because of this discrepancy in object codes between Budget and Finance and the court. And the court's definition actually aligns with DHHL's definition. So what we would ask this committee's consideration is, number one, the other challenge for us is that the B cost items are based on our actual expenditures for fiscal year 2016. It does not include any type of additional programmatic activities that we anticipate occurring for things like implementation of the Kau'u management plan or dealing with issues we're facing on the top of Mauna Kea with our Aina Mauna legacy plan. It doesn't include any of those additional resources because it's just based on our actual expenditures for fiscal year 2016. So for the committee's consideration, what we would ask is either, number one, to go with the governor's budget of the $25 million, but provide us with flexibility to spend it just as any other agency on either the A or the B cost items, and not limit it just to $6 million additional for fringe, because I think that would essentially cover all of our A and B costs and allow us a little bit of room to include additional programmatic activities that we anticipate happening on the homelands, such as management of, implementing the Kau'u Resource Management Plan, Aina Mauna Legacy Plan, some of the land management issues that are significantly a greater resource. The second thing is that if we're in this catch-22, and again, I had hoped we could work it out on the administration side, so we would not have to have this conversation. But nevertheless, if we don't have to spend out of our special funds, then we're not in this quandary of having to pursue resolution of the matter through legal courses, and that's never the most effective or efficient way to do that. Because in order for us to do our job effectively, we absolutely need the support of the legislature in terms of meeting the program's trust obligations. I think the last thing that I wanted to bring to the committee's attention, of course, is the governor's ask for us in terms of the CIP. The governor did ask for $25 million, of which, hang on, let me get that. Yes, $25 million. He provided us a $20 million lump sum as well as $5 million in repair and maintenance for the homelands. We do have a breakdown of the $20 million for lot development if the committee is interested in terms of what the department feels are the priorities or where we should be moving. But you also have our sufficient sums request, which is kind of all of the projects that are kind of queued up and ready to go. So if you're interested in either our breakdown or a discussion about the projects that are part of the sufficient sums, we're very open to have that conversation. And I will just close there and then be open for any questions the committee may have.
Thank you. Senator Shavapo.
Thank you very much, Director Masagatani, for that presentation. I don't know if Jeff Fujimoto is here.
Norman is here.
Okay, Jenny from engineering, and I'm glad to see Deputy Director Ayla here. That was really interesting to hear that only 3.3% of your land is on Oahu.
Yes.
And my understanding is that after you're done building out Kapolei, you're looking at Nanakuli Ranch.
Yes.
Potentially as a place to build.
Yes.
And, last session, I worked with DHHL on getting, and Councilwoman Pine on getting $6 million to extend the emergency access road through the Nanakuli homestead.
Yes.
And part of that is, multifold. As you know, the traffic in the Nanakuli area is a nightmare every day for the people on the Waianae Coast. And now that people are starting to learn that Nanakuli Ranch is going to become more homes, they're concerned about the impact on traffic. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of combine our efforts here and use the $6 million not just for emergency, but actually to create a second access road. And I know that Deputy Director Ayla had suggested maybe an elevated roadway at the back of the homestead so that everyone on the coast, including the homesteaders, can use that road on a day-to-day basis to get in and out of Waianae, rather than sending all these new homesteaders at the Nanakuli Ranch onto Farrington Highway. So I really want to try to emphasize that, and I know that Jeff is working with the city on trying to come up with a plan, but if there's any way that and I'm committed to continuing to get more funding, because
Okay.
I know $6 million is not enough, to try to make that a reality.
Okay.
So anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that. And then the other thing, I was really interested in the subsistence lots.
Yes.
And I think that's something that would really appeal to, my constituents, and I'm sure others.
Yes.
Is there any chance that, maybe the Nanakuli Ranch, some of those could be subsistence lots, and maybe small, even like 1 acre? I know that they're really popular in Waianae. Maka'a Valley Road. Those are all 1 acre ag lots that people really, they have their house, and then in the back they've got, some subsistence farming going on.
Right. We definitely can look at it because the back of Nanakuli Valley is where, as you had indicated, our Oahu Island Plan indicates that we're going to go to next. Mm-hmm. If there's no additional lands that comes into DHHL inventory to develop. And so this would be the time to have that conversation with the applicants on the list to say, is there an interest for these kinds of lots? And, what would the cost for the infrastructure be if it were developed at that standard, a lower standard? And I think the good news would be that our goal is to try to have these lots available on the neighbor islands, particularly the Big Island, by the end of this administration, by 2018, awarding of these lots. That will give us some idea of the experience with the county, because it's kind of a new animal, as to what kinds of challenges or issues we have with the county with this kind of lot. But I definitely think it's, especially in Nanakuli, because that's a lot of homes being into an area that, we're looking at potentially, yeah.
Yeah, and even the Waianae Valley Homestead. I think there's some ag lots up there that are vacant and not being used. And I'm not sure if it would help to maybe convert them to subsistence. I don't know if that would help at all, but I'm very excited. And I understand too that might mean too that it's probably less dense if it's going to be subsistence. Then you can less people. So
yes.
Yeah, I know they got to balance the two. And
right.
So I don't know, but it just maybe for certain areas in Waianae it might work. So
yes.
But thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, members. Questions? Senator Inouye?
Thank you, Chair. With regards to, I think, the communication that Senator Shimabukuro asked, so the subsistence lot she talks about, is that the conversion that you're considering with regards to the agriculture lots? That's the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
It's adding an additional opportunity.
Okay, then
yes.
My question is, are you warned by the laws of the county and the state laws with regards to ag lands and what you're allowed? Because our laws are pretty strict. Some are like no housing, but we want to provide the homesteaders with a home because
right.
that's what you're creating,
right.
agriculture lots.
Right.
So I was just wondering if you have to abide by the county, by the laws that's in statute with regards to agriculture, the zoning and stuff like that. Yes.
So when it comes to the land use, the Hawaiian Homes Commission has exclusive jurisdiction about land use of the homelands.
Oh, okay.
But having said that, so the county zoning doesn't necessarily apply on the homelands, but we have to work with the county because we don't have right now the resources internally to do things like building permits and those kinds of things. So that's where we are with these subsistence ag lots is working with the county. This is where the devil's in the detail, right? I mean, is it agricultural? Is it residential? What are the standards that the homesteader is going to have to comply with, and trying to make it as simple as possible, because what we're learning from our homesteaders or our lessees is they get caught between DHHL and the county.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So to bring that clarification.
Okay,
so. Second
question before I leave, and I must be excused because I need to get to the airport to see the new island aircraft come in. You talked about the vacancies,
yes.
and I guess this applies to your staff as well. As a neighbor island traveler, I
yes.
see I sit next to many of your staff members
yes.
because we have insufficient staff on the neighbor islands.
Right.
So, that brings to mind that many that have to do the commutes from your staff. I mean, that's
yes.
a lot of stress.
Yes.
So hopefully that we can address, those vacancies that, it's kind of unreal because the Big Island, we have the majority of your lands.
Yes.
And your staff commutes between Kona and Hilo because of the vacancies that are there in the individual Kuleana areas between Kona and Hilo. So I'm kind of glad that hopefully we can work out with addressing that situation. But
yes.
thanks to the staff who must do the job, because it's not easy, getting on the plane in the same day because you can't afford to set them up with housing. And,
right.
The commute is, I'm sure, no different than what we all go through. But
right.
Thanks to staff for doing that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. Questions? Senator Kim?
Good morning.
Since we're on the vacancies, why don't I start there?
Okay.
So you stated that 260 is the positions, what did you say? Sufficient sums identified, a staffing level of 260 general
Yes.
funded positions. So
Yes.
is it just the number that you folks correlate with what is sufficient to handle, or is it the actual bodies that is needed?
We actually did an analysis with our management when we first put this together to identify additional positions that would be needed to operate at a level that was, adequate, and there are actually positions associated with all of those.
Understand.
Yes.
Okay, but it seems like a lot of times these analysis is ideal, but in essence, you've not been operating, because if you look at your vacancies, and you only filled, 20 positions in over a year. It took you over a year to fill 20 positions, right? From July 1 to November of 2016, July 1 of 2015. So it took you over a year to only fill 20 positions. You've got, 87 positions unfilled.
Yes.
And of those positions, there's a number I look at. It's been vacant since 06, been vacant since 07, been vacant since 08, 11, 12, 13.
Right.
So you've got positions that have been vacant for so long, and yet you're telling us you need 260, when in actuality you don't even have those positions filled to operate. So I'm, again, we're looking at this so-called number that is sufficient because of analysis, but what is practical and actual?
That's a very good question. So let me speak to that specifically. You're correct. There are 87 positions that are currently vacant. Of those, included 28 new positions that the department received from last session. So we've had them for 6 months. About of the 59 remaining existing positions, I tried to note the positions that either, since this report was done in November, are in the pipe. And so of the 59, there's actually 25 that are either filled, a selection has been made, so we have a candidate that's going to start. It's under interview, so we have the list, we're interviewing, and we're in active recruitment. So it's about 25 of those that are in some standard of being filled, actively being filled. That still leaves a balance of 34 positions. And so in addition, with the 28 new positions that we have, DHHL, not unlike other state agencies, over time, you just kind of MacGyver your situation. You don't...
I understand.
Right? And so this was a unique opportunity that DHHL had because, the governor committed, as well as human resources, to say, what can we do to assist you with getting these positions up and established? So with the new positions, many of them assumed a slightly different organizational structure. So we're in a two-part reorg right now that we're trying to expedite so that we can kind of reestablish the foundation of the infrastructure of the agency to address some critical aspects where we've been delinquent. One of them has been in our customer service and our responsiveness. So that's an area that we definitely are looking at, and to that end, we've actually hired a consultant, or we're in the process of bringing on resources to assist us in looking at how we do this internally, as well as we've just hired a customer service manager to assist the department through this reorganization process.
Okay, can I stop you right there? So you hired a consultant to do what?
No, we're bringing on, we are in the process of bringing on a consultant, a small entity, to assist us with some of the process mapping or re-engineering or reorganizational work, because it's a process that you have to go through for you to reorganize, anything that's branch and above, Anything that's branch and below, I think it's branch and below, is delegated to the department, but you still have to do, and there's memorandums, you have to consult with the union, you have to describe the positions. So to bring hands on deck, because most of my staff is working 2 and 3 functions,
Okay, but the point I'm trying to make is that if you needed these positions so crucially, why are positions still open from '06? I mean, it took so long to fill them, and it's not filled yet. Some of these you're projecting to filled.
Right.
And then these new positions, it says to be established, so we don't even have a date there, to be established, and yet you have a February 1, 2017 fill date, which is not practical, so I'm not sure why. Are you going to have all those positions filled by February 1, 2017?
I think that's an error. In terms of the to be established, that was an error. You're correct. We should have got, in terms of the to be established, we should have done a better analysis of when those were going to be done. My focus was on trying to give an accurate fill date for the positions that we already had established, so I apologize for that.
So in going forward, I hope that you'll look at these positions that you've had unfilled for so long before coming in and asking us to give you 60 more positions when you haven't even filled the positions we gave you last year. So that's that.
Okay.
The second question I have is, you have 10 pages of active contracts.
Yes.
10 pages. I mean, that's the most I've seen so far. What's the total of active contracts, total amount that's been encumbered or is due? Do you know that?
Answer to that question.
No. We gave the committee an Excel version, this totaling, it can be total.
Yeah, it's not totaled. I'm looking at these things, it's not totaled. And then you have, like, say, the very first item on that list, this is table 16, I think, members, 16?
Yes,
Yeah,
table 16.
So the first amount is no amount, and yet max value is 76,000. Outstanding balance is 26,000. Executed on 6/02, and from 4/2002 to 12/31/2006. So 2006 is 10 years ago. You still have on the books an outstanding balance of 76,000?
Right. So those are periodically, and we need to do this again, going back and contacting these contractors and unencumbering these old balances if they're no longer active contracts. The last time we did that was maybe about 3 years ago, so we do need to go back and do that for some of these older
Well,
contracts.
even if you did it 3 years ago, some of these is 2002, 2008, 2009. I mean, these are old contracts, and many of them, some of the amounts don't match the max value. The max value exceeds what's the amount. I'm assuming that's the appropriated amount. And then there's huge outstanding balances.
In some cases, we do run a number of our contracts are for our development projects. So some of the balances will be large, or some of the planning contracts that we're doing. And our hope is that as we are able to staff some of these contracts, we'll be able to bring in-house. But in terms of, your point is well taken. So we will need to look at that in terms of unencumbering some of these older contracts.
So can you explain why there's a huge discrepancy between the amount, like I'm looking at one of them for Aqua Engineers, and it's appropriate 106,000, yet the maximum amount is 288,000, and the balance due is even more what the amount was, 181,000. I mean, this is just one example of many in your 10 pages that is like that.
Okay, you're looking at, just so that I'm sure, and then I'm going to have staff.
This is on I'm only on the first page.
Okay.
Aqua Engineers is
Why don't you come?
No, I don't need to know what it is. I just need to understand why your amount is a certain one, and then why max is more, and then the outstanding balance is even more than what was, I assume, appropriated or was contracted. It doesn't tell me what amount is. The column that says amount.
She's looking at this.
These are your numbers. And I don't know, maybe the chair knows, but I don't.
the contract is for a water system. We have
Okay,
on
I
the
don't need to
island of
know what
Kauai.
the contract.
Yeah.
I just want to
The
understand the
contract is
tables.
for like a 3-year period, but we encumber as we have funds available.
Okay, so the amount isn't what you need for the project? the amount column is not what you assign to the project or to the, I don't understand. What
The
is,
original contract was for 100,000.
okay,
The contract is for a three-year period. And so we encumber year one, 100,000, year two, 200. It increases to 200,000. Yeah.
Okay, but that's-
100,000 for the first year, 100,000 for the second year.
but that's not what this says. It says 106,000 amount, the maximum is 288, you owe, or outstanding is 181, but the time period is from 4/1/2011 to 4/30/2014. So that's for the entire period?
This is
And then you have another one for Aqua, right below it, for another 255,000, but the maximum, I mean, the amount is actually 448, and you owe 192, and that was from 11 to 2014. And then the next one, PBR is for 16,000, yet it's 37,000. You owe 21,000, or outstanding 21,000, more than the original amount, and that was 2011 to 2013. These are old stuff. So
These are contracts that went out to bid, and
so is amount the bid amount? The columns that says amount, is that the bid amount? The first,
the amount,
the third
the amount
column?
that the first column is the amount that was encumbered. But if it's a three-year contract, it has a maximum amount that the department can do supplemental contracts.
Okay, so the amount that goes to bid and the amount that's encumbered is not the same as the max amount, so they have a cushion? I mean, I don't understand.
No, the way it works is we go out to bid.
Okay,
When we go out to bid, we normally, for these water systems, we go out for 3 years because it's a very lengthy process and water is very valuable. So we encumber 3 years at a time. And so what we do is we encumber the funds for the first year. And then as the second year approaches, then we encumber an additional amount for the second year. And for the third year, we encumber an additional amount on the contract for the third year. That's how it works.
okay, the numbers still don't seem to work out. Because you have one here for 19,000, and yet it's 325,000 the max amount, and this is for a period of just 2 years, 2016 to 2018.
Is this for the aqua engineers?
No, this is for Hawaii forestry industry. So I don't think we're going to resolve this right now, but I think
We'll
the
get
way
you the
you're-
details so that you're able to.
the way you're reporting this to me doesn't calculate in my
Okay.
mind. So I'm not sure if anybody else has that concern, but I do. And it's because you have 10 pages of this consistently having this discrepancies, and that they're so old. Some of this stuff is supposed to have been reconciled.
So what we'll do is get the details, so because I understand what you're saying, that it is confusing, the table is confusing, so we'll get the detail for the committee so that you're able to understand what we're trying to communicate.
Isn't there a law that says you need to take things off you after so many years if the contractor doesn't give you the final bill, that you can write it off already? I believe that when we worked with airports, because they had a number of old contracts, and we talked about that, and that you're supposed to notify, they don't get back to you, then you can wipe it off and keep the funds, the balance. So is anybody in your department looking at that?
As I mentioned, the last time we did that comprehensively was about 3 years ago, so we're probably due to do that again.
Why don't you do it regularly?
One of it is a staffing consideration. Right now, our fiscal officer position is vacant, so we need to fill that position, and then the individual that actually was doing that function left the department, so So I think it's a
So
very
the position
valid.
has been vacant for how long?
I'm not sure that, because the person who was doing that function, she was working out of the chairman's office, and I think she did that work as an addition to her regular work, which I believe was part of the NAHASDA or the grants recipient contract grants work. So that grants position went back to actually doing grants work. Yeah. A lot of this, what you're talking about, is a fiscal function. And so,
But
we
isn't
do
that the
need
heart
to-
and soul of your department, the fiscal part of it? I mean, we're talking about hundreds and thousands of dollars.
Well, our
Not
fiscal,
millions.
we actually are audited every year, and we actually, by external auditors, because we do have bonds, and so our audit actually came out clean. So I
Okay,
think it's a
well-
matter of communicating and the table is confusing, or the way that we've
Well,
filled the
whether
table
your
out.
audit came out
so-
clean, the fact that you're carrying some of these outstanding balances from 2002 concerns me.
Understood.
And to say that you didn't do it since 3 years, I mean, I don't know what to say about that. So, okay, finally, the last thing is your list. You talked about
Yes.
your list, that you're only dealing with 15% of the people on the list,
We are dealing with,
or those are the ones that are responsive.
responding. Yes.
So what efforts are you doing to clean up this list, to start again, or to get it so that you have a manageable list of people who are active instead of using all of these people, staff, to keep going through this list that 85% of people don't respond, when some of those people can be doing other things like looking at this fiscal part of your budget instead of working with this list of non-responsive people of 85%. It doesn't make sense.
I hear you. For us, the best we can do is to try to, as we have been, reach out to the individuals on the list through other resources, such as
Okay.
ads in the paper, to say, can you update your information? Because that's all we can do, is say we can't get a hold of you.
Well, why can't you send everybody certified letters and say, if you don't respond back, we're cleaning the list, and if we don't hear from you, your name will be taken off, and you'll have to start the process again. Why can't you do that?
I think the spot on the waiting list has become more than just any other kind of list. Something like that, I think, would be pretty profound in terms of the impact it would have. Part of the situation that we're dealing with, or the state is dealing with regard to some of the litigation that's gone on, has to do with this list. So we just bring it to the committee's attention. We're open to,
Well, you need to devise something, because the definition, and you talked about definition of sufficient, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So to continue to try to reach out to non-responsive, to me, is insanity. It's insane. So you guys need to come up with your 200 employees to decide, how can we put together a list that's manageable, you can deal with, and you somehow got to clean up this list.
So I think the only thing I will say to that, Senator, is that anything the department does that's of a policy consideration, our beneficiaries demand and want to be engaged in. So we can discuss with the beneficiary community the option of removing people from the list. I don't know how that's going to be received by the individuals that are on the waiting list. But that is something that...
Well, I think those that are engaged will want the list to be clean, because it's those that are not responding, obviously may not be interested or whatever. So, somehow they need to be informed, and if they don't respond, then they're off the list. Then you're starting again if they want to come back on. I mean, I don't know the details, but that's where you folks are the ones. You got to come up with something. Otherwise, we'll think of it. You don't want us to devise it. You want to be the ones to be proactive in front of this, because every year we hear the same thing from you about this list. And I know it's emotional. I know it, but I mean, to only work with 15%, it doesn't make any sense. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Members, questions? Senator Galatario?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director, for coming today.
Sure.
Just a
Senator.
quick follow-up on what Senator Kim was was mentioning the number of people on the list and cleaning it up. This is not a question for you. We would just hope that you could follow that particular suggestion to come back each year. The list will just grow. So to provide the rules in that way so that you can actually have a real-time list of people who really want to get on the lands. But that wasn't where I wanted to go. I wanted to talk about sufficient funds. And by and large, that's a subjective call, wouldn't you say, on whoever would be defining sufficient calls. The legislature will define sufficient funds, rather, the way we would see fit. You've come to us with your idea of what sufficient funds would be defined as in the area of 59 million in 18 and 53 million in 2019, but that's sufficient funds. Now, is that a part of the governor's budget or your budget?
That is the department's, that's the department's or the commission's request of sufficiency for its purpose 4.
And that would go to the governor to be determined, and he will send down a number?
Yes, and so that we are as transparent as we can be, we make the same ask of this body as to what the commission deems sufficient for that purpose, as well as the other purposes under the act.
I would be confident in saying that this body would want to appropriate funds north of where it was before, and we've tried our very best to do that.
Sure.
And we intend to
appreciate that.
We intend to follow that line.
Yes.
I would say, though, that 59 and 53 are a bit much for us to consider at this point. I'm just going to submit that for your consideration.
Sure.
The next place I'd like to talk through is Nahasda.
Okay.
And I know that you've been drawing down. I think the last time we talked with any substance on this matter was following a conversation I had with Senator Schatz.
Yes.
And it was about Secretary Castro zeroing out the executive budget for 1 year.
Yes.
What was the outcome of that? Because once you zero out after 2 years in an executive budget, you're like gone.
Right. So the following year, that happened, I believe, in February or March of 2015. There was a lot of concern, of course, expressed by the congressional delegation, in particular Senator Schatz, and so he did. And I think that's probably around the time that you met with the senator as well as the HUD members. In December of 2015, I also went up to D.C. To discuss as best as we could or answer any questions or concerns. I think collectively, the advocacy of our congressionals, as well as others at the state level, there was a number put into into the president's budget in the following year. It was a small number, but there was a number, and based on that, Senator Schatz was able to place $5 million in the Senate version of the appropriations bill for this program. Unfortunately, we ended the congressional year without, it was what's called a continuing resolution, and so they went off the 2016 number. As I had mentioned, the focus, at least in Indian country, has been on reauthorizing the entire program because they're very concerned. And so that's where we have been trying to be as a part of that conversation. But the Native Hawaiian provisions, frankly, have, based on what we're hearing from the lobbyists who work with NEIHC, have created challenges in getting the entire Nahasda program reauthorized for Indian country. So
that would include the Native Hawaiian.
Yes, Title 8 is Title 8 is Native Hawaiian, and the remaining titles refer to the rest of Indian country. So tribes, Alaska Natives.
So in the event that Nahasda, if it's not re-upped, the 38 million that we have in the queue right now would be it.
Potentially, yes.
Potentially, yes. Is there a time frame on drawing that down to completion?
In the current, let me make sure I understand the question you're asking. Are you asking if we have a plan, or are you asking does the money have an expiration date? on it.
No, we have a plan.
Do we have a plan? Yes, we do have a plan. In fact, there are several projects in terms that are in the pipe for this money. Part of, and if I may just kind of to talk to them, one of the challenges that we're having, however, is we are very aware and sensitive to the need for the state to perform in expending these resources. So the projects that are in the pipe are not necessarily the fastest spenders. Yeah. So, for example, we were asked by the senator and as well as by Secretary Castro to look at urban rentals. And following right on that conversation, we took the one property we have in Mo'ili'ili and put it into environmental review, which we need to do in order to spend federal monies. Unfortunately, there are environmental issues that have surfaced, which is going to elongate that situation.
There's remediation on that property?
There needs to be remediation on that property. Yes, that's what we're discovering. In addition, we, with the water systems, because we had USDA monies as well, we were able to lock those monies, but part of the NAHASDA resources are being used to match, so that's actually going to be primarily a federal project. But in order to do the USDA work, it slows down getting these monies encumbered. So we've asked for technical assistance provision from HUD to assist us with looking at, we have this Waimanalo project, for example. It has had some problems maintaining its affordability. Is there the possibility of providing an operating subsidy for that? That's not something we're familiar with. So we've asked for TA assistance from HUD for that. In addition, with all of these vacant lot awards, there are a number of families that we're expecting that are going to need NAHASDA assistance for their home, to build their home. We do have a loan product, but getting that loan product deployed out through credit, native CDFI entities like credit unions, we face procurement challenges. So again, we've asked HUD to assist us with TA as to how we can get these monies out more expeditiously.
So what's your timeline?
Our timeline is over the next the next calendar year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we want, as I mentioned, there's 374 lots.
Yeah, my specific interest is
NAHASDA.
Is NAHASDA as it relates to Makali Mo'ili'ili, the Polojong, because that's in my district.
Yes.
So as a new model for part of the inventory as well.
Yes.
Which would probably be the next item of interest for me, which is rental housing opportunities. And not everybody can afford mortgages at the existing rates. So what's the plan for administrative rules so you could create the rental housing product?
Administrative rules, the next set of administrative rules are being worked on as we speak. As you may be aware, we have an extended process because we have beneficiary consultation. So rules for the rental housing, I think, is in that queue next up to be discussed. Our challenge is that we don't have any property in urban Honolulu. So, I don't know if there's the opportunity to have the discussion with HHFDC or this body of partnering with, let's say, HHFDC to get maybe a mixed project where it's, so maybe we in some way contribute to the project and take a certain number of units for our beneficiaries, but we don't own and operate it. You know what I mean?
Well, this is where public-private partnerships come into play.
Yes.
And I think HHFDC, along with the Department of the Judiciary, we're working on a project right up here in Alder Street, where Judiciary provides the land, HHFDC provides the financing.
Yes.
And if you got NAHASDA money in the pipe too, we could start sooner than later on the Bolodrome spot. But I just submit that for your consideration, because you say you got no land in urban Honolulu. That's your land in urban Honolulu, and you go up.
Yep, that's the only piece we have.
Yeah, I know, but
right.
it's probably be the only going up that you do, right?
Yes.
So anyway, I'm going to stay with you on that.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right, so finally, Chair, this is a hot item, but it's got to be talked about. I want to talk about Sandwich Island communications.
Yes.
What happens now? I think what we want to avoid is any type of interruption in service.
Absolutely.
This has absolutely nothing to do with any particular individual or any entity.
Yes.
It's about serving the beneficiaries. So in the event that Sandwich Island Communications is unable to clear the deck, so to speak, and provide the services without subsidy, because there's going to be an end game to that one day.
Right.
Right? They can't be picking up the tab without sufficient subsidies from the feds. What happens at that point is DHHL willing, or is it appropriate to ask if DHHL will fund the development of this communication infrastructure? I know it's a question for PUC, because I've asked director, the chair rather, but you know they've got shackles on too about what they can say.
Right.
Do you have anything that you can share that is appropriate for this body to know?
So I will share what I know, and I may get scolded later by council, but let me just say, first of all, which I think is public information, you know, the department's role as it relates to the telecommunication provision is as a landowner, right? So they have a disposition on our lands, a license that was done in 1995. It's a perpetual exclusive license, and it does need to be redone because times have changed. Whether it's Sandwich Isle or whether it's a new provider, that license needs to be redone. So that's the first thing, and that's been expressed at the commission table and made clear to Mr. He when he was still the head of Sandwich Isle Communication. The second thing is directly to your concern. The commission has the same concern, and so we've been in terms of not having any interrupted service for the beneficiary. And so we've been in direct communication with the Federal Communications Commission about the department's concern and that there not be uninterrupted service, and how can we best partner with the FCC so that there's as smooth a transition as possible, because we don't have regulatory jurisdiction, and in terms of telecommunication, that's a different entity that has that. I think the good news is that they are open to that, making sure that transition is as smooth as possible. With regard to the infrastructure that SIC owns, you know, one of the first things is to try to understand what is that infrastructure, and it's hard because they are a existing corporate private entity, but what is there, because not all of it is on the homelands, right? And you know, what is the possibility? It may not be DHHL that is, especially as it relates to the borings of their landing sites or some of the communication that runs not on the homelands, that could potentially offer opportunity for the state as a whole, as I've talked to my cohorts on the cabinet. So I think at this point where we are, our commission is at, we do have special counsel in DC to assist us because this is not an area that we have expertise. We're trying to work with the FCC to ensure that beneficiaries do not feel the jerk of what's going on. We're working with the Department of Commerce and Consumer Relations in terms of the consumer advocate, because I believe his concerns and ours in terms of the beneficiaries are aligned. And as much as possible, trying to support a smoother transition, if there is going to be one, for the beneficiaries, as well as for ensuring that if there are returns to be made at the end of the day, that the trust is appropriately compensated, because the way the license word reads now, it's very vague. Mm-hmm. So it's a day-by-day process, but I did want to let you know kind of where we are in terms of the commission, and I'm trying to reach out as much as I can to my cohorts on the cabinet, especially Kat and I have been talking, as well as the consumer advocate, how we can make sure that the concerns of the state are expressed to the FCC in this transition.
Yeah, because you guys are the closest to the ground, that's why. You guys are the ground over here.
Yes.
FCC is up there.
Yes.
And, you know, they have nothing invested in this except to be the regulatory agency.
Yes.
I would just close by, you know, saying that, and I put it to the chair of the PUC too, you know, that if something happens, any kind of disruption of service happens, and a kupuna cannot get help, we got a problem. So that's why I wanted to just articulate that there's concerns on the state level, certainly from this senator,
Sure.
about the inability to provide communication services on the homelands because of this situation. So that was not a question. That's more of something to take
Appreciate
away.
it.
Okay.
Thank you,
Appreciate
sir.
that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. Questions? Okay, maybe I have a question. Okay. How about just a couple of questions?
Okay. Sure. Sure.
And I'm sure we'll have more questions going forward as we have time to go through the testimony.
Okay.
We only got this yesterday, so there wasn't a lot of time to be able to go through the materials thoroughly. I'll pause a bit on the Nahasda question since we've been going through that. And let's see, want to be able to go through a couple of other things. Can
Okay.
you, let's look at table 15. Can you provide us maybe later on with a breakdown? I know for overtime, administrative and operating support, you had about $100,000 in overtime expenses for that particular suborg, yeah, for suborg 4328. Can you get us a
Yes.
breakdown of that in terms of where, in particular, you're experiencing that much overtime, just so that we can see if you're requesting a requisite amount of additional FTE support? Obviously,
Okay.
it looks like you're having a hard time making it through at your administrative level to require that much overtime in your administrative branch. So
Okay.
I would expect that you're looking for more FTEs to help you. But we
Yes.
can't really tell if we can't see where your overtime is all going at that high level. Usually we don't see that much OT in administration.
Okay.
So please break out specifically where the OT is coming from, because usually in other departments we see specifically which staffing or which division is getting all the OT. I can't really tell by this one. It just looks like it's coming straight from your office or your division. So if we can get a better idea, then we'll know specifically what kind of FTEs or additional FTEs are required to assist with the capacity
Okay.
that you folks need.
Just a note, Senator. This program ID 625 was brand new for DHHL.
I'm looking specific at the suborg. Almost everything's 625 for the program ID.
Okay.
So, yeah, specifically what kind of positions are requiring
Okay.
this type of overtime?
We will get that
It's a
for
lump
you.
sum of 100,000 budgeted estimated overtime for fiscal 17 and 18. We actually need the actuals as well. I don't even have a base salary actuals for fiscal 16. What this also tells me is this because it's a brand new position that you're looking
Got
at,
it.
or is this established?
Okay.
Usually, too, we have established positions that are accruing the overtime. I can't tell if this is an established positions that are accruing the overtime, and that's why you know for a fact that these positions are pumping hard because they've been working that wait list. They've been working hard on new projects to get them out.
Okay.
I have no idea
Okay.
on this. All I know is you want $100,000 for overtime each year.
Okay. We'll get that detail for you.
So
then.
we need to know why and if this is going to help beneficiaries or not. We can't really tell
Okay.
on this one. So let us know. It's not also clear because it just shows 2 other actuals with no OT below it. So I'm not sure why that's even listed there in terms of the OT chart. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. I know we went over some of the vacant and non-vacant positions as well. Maybe let's just jump to Nahasda at this particular point, because like I said, I'm going to have more questions later, but I really need more time to actually go over your testimony since we did not have any time to go through it. We got
Okay.
it yesterday. You said you had $38.9 million balance left in Nahasda.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes,
Does
as
this
of January 2017.
Does this include the 2 investment accounts that you folks opened back, I believe, in with the 2011 and 2012, or 2012 and 2013 funds?
Yes, it does.
It does. Okay. And so our understanding is that HUD intends for you folks to have that spent down prior to fiscal 18. Is that correct?
Is that HUD's expectation that it would be spent?
My
also?
understanding is HUD
The 38
believes
with-
that you folks should have that and gave you the ability to put the $24 million in an investment account through fiscal 18.
Yes.
But they
so-
do not,
you're-
that's through fiscal 18, but does not want to see that money in the federal
Yes.
system beyond that point.
Yes.
So we're in fiscal 17 right now, which
Right.
means that you've got to spend that $24 million
Right.
this
Yes.
year.
And I think we are actually spending into those balances. Is
Okay.
that correct? Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what's the plans to spend that $24 million in currently sitting in that investment account?
So for us, the most critical thing is the encumbrance, because it's getting those monies encumbered so we can get them out the door. As I was mentioning to Senator Galataria, there are several projects that are in the pipe. The water systems is one. Our financing for the existing homesteaders that we're doing, I'm sorry, not existing, the awards of vacant lots, and we can break this down for you. Our challenges have been in expediting getting those resources out. So we're trying to look at technical assistance support, which we've already contracted with HUD for. We ask them, we need help with this. They do the task order to get that help to us, and that's already been done in terms of trying to get the blocks of resources, financing out to nonprofits that can assist us with that. But I apologize that that's not laid out here. We can do that for you, Senator, for the purposes of the committee, since there's interest in that as to what the specific plans are and what the projects are
I think
associated
our
with
main
that.
concern is that we've asked you about, especially those two big lumps of money, the $24 million that were sitting in the investment account, because, again, HUD gave you folks that authority to do that for a limited period of
Yes.
time.
Right.
They were very explicit with you all that that was not their preference to have it sitting in a CD, but they'd rather actually get that into a position where it actually helps beneficiaries.
Right.
You're coming up on a point when it should be,
Yes.
actually spent out. They don't want that sitting in the federal lock system.
Right.
And again, more importantly too, because we're not exactly in a solid federal position right now. If we
Yes.
want to be able to compete for continued dollars, we want to give the CODEL every good shot at getting additional dollars,
Yes.
then you've got to comply.
Yes.
If you're not going to comply, then our congressional delegation is not going to be in a good position to continue to get us federal dollars. So that $24 million cannot be sitting in the lock system come fiscal 18. And I
Right.
think that's what's really important. That's why we keep hounding you guys about spend down, make sure that you folks know what you need to do, whichever
Right.
way you have to do it. And they're watching.
Yes.
And they know exactly how much you're spending. Yes, you have been bringing it down, but you had a very high number to begin with. That's why we're watching. And you still have that $24 million sitting in that investment account. It's not helping beneficiaries right there.
Right. I believe I hear the concern. And so I think maybe the best thing for us to do is to put together the detail for the committee's consideration so that you can see where we are, what's in the works, what the timeframes are in terms
Please
of.
do, but it's not just for the committee. I would think that the federal delegation has to also be concerned
Right.
because they're in DC trying to fight for you, to fight for the beneficiaries, to fight for Hawaii.
Right.
And if they come into they come on the heels of the federal, 18 calendar, and you folks still have $24 million sitting in that investment account, and HUD asked them, well, how come you didn't spend the money? What are you going to tell them?
Well, we've actually started to spend into that account is what I'm saying.
But if you still have $6 million in that federal account, and you tell them, well, it's really hard, permitting is such, and this and that's a problem. We've asked for technical assistance. Again, you've had that money sitting in that account since what year? 2012? But when did you
2015.
get that money? State fiscal year 2012 is when you got the authority to move that money into that particular account based upon this document that I got from you in November 5th of 2015.
Right. So I think the
So
authority.
you've had that authority and you've had those monies from that far back. You got that money, that $12.7 million and that $12 million in program year 11 and program year 12. That's how old that money is.
Right.
I don't care if it predates you.
hang on. Yeah.
Excuses. Your beneficiaries want you to do something. I think that's what Senator Kim is saying. That's what your beneficiaries are saying.
Right.
And I get it. I appreciate, yes, you are spending $14.1 million in 2015 and $11.7 million in 2016 and $9.3 in 2017. That's very admirable. But for God's sake, if we want to give our federal delegation every chance they have at getting us more, then you know exactly what you have to do. Stop making excuses. You know exactly what you have to do by the said date. Let's do it. Let's do this. We've talked about these particular accounts, especially these investment accounts, for how long? And when the legislature tried to help you even spend NAHASDA funds last year with GIAs, you refused to even help us with that. So I guess my next question to you is, when we try to work with you on GIAs, will you work with us?
We are completely open to working with you.
Will you work with our grant and aid peoples to say, okay, which GIAs would qualify, and if we do find ones that qualify, will you work to amend your NAHASDA housing plan to allow these grant and aids to be funded through NAHASDA funds? Because right now you've got to work down that balance.
Yes. Senator,
Seriously, because
right.
you have projects on every island that need funding for NAHASDA, and you've got a pot of funds.
Okay, so with the GIAs, we are absolutely open to working with the legislature in providing resources to community-based projects. In terms of the GIAs, the only thing I will say, Senator, is we actually want to work with you. If that was interpreted as us not wanting to work with you, I apologize for that, because we actually do want to work with you. The utilization of NAHASDA dollars for projects that come into this body, the community-based projects, there are a couple of issues that we do have to look at, yeah. And what we can do is write to the community associations to see if there's an interest, because it's more than just amending the housing plan. The first is that when we talk about CIP projects, when you're dealing with NAHASDA resources, it's complicated. The compliance is complicated. The environmental issues, the labor issues, all of that. So we ask that if there's a CIP project that's going on, that we actually have it in our inventory so that we're able to implement. So some of these projects are actually under a land disposition to a community-based organization. So we would ask them to give it back, so if they were interested in NAHASDA, so that we can utilize it. We did actually, the second issue is, from the procurement standpoint, in terms of what we've been advised is that when it comes to NAHASDA dollars that are going to a subrecipient, which would be like a community-based association, they're supposed to go out through a competitive process. So that's another issue. I don't know whether that's a federal requirement or a state requirement. So we want to work with you. We actually had approached some of the individuals earlier, before they even came to this body, for resources for GIA, because since that summer, when we've talked to the various associations, in some cases, they don't want the federal monies, they want the state GIA monies, yeah. So, we actually have, looked at those projects before as there's a special terminology, they're called, what are they called now? Those kinds of community-based projects? Model activities. So model activities within our annual housing plan, we're open to amending that to include the model activities if that's something that the community associations are interested in doing. So for example, Pana Eva, previously, they actually qualified their income base. We were looking at working with them, having the project come back to DHHL, putting in the work, and then giving the license back or the lease back to the Pana Eva Homestead Association. So it's just, there's a few more steps is all I'm saying, yeah. So we're happy to work with your staff.
I'm aware of the steps that are taken. We've met, both the money chairs have met with HUD. Last legislative session, we met and we spoke with you folks as well. I know the CIP chairs, vice chairs spoke with you folks as well. Obviously, there was some kind of miscommunication. But I will tell you this too, talk with your beneficiaries. They're interested.
Okay, we'll follow up.
From what we've heard, they're interested in NAHASDA funds. I'm surprised to hear that they'd rather have state funds than NAHASDA funds. I think they just want their projects funded. They want help.
I think at the end of the day, they just want some help. We want to see beneficiaries get the support that they need in their communities. That's all of us, I think, want.
We agree.
So let's all communicate. I think communication here really is the key,
Okay. I would agree.
you know? And I want to hear that it's not that just you want to work with the legislature, you will work with the legislature to help beneficiary populations in this particular situation. Because number one, NAHASDA has to get better in terms of this drawdown, especially, as I said, with this investment fund. It's really critical that you burn that down at the appropriate time when it was expected that you liquidate that amount per HUD's requirements, especially to put our congressional delegation in a situation to advocate for future funds, because that's in such a, it's in a shaky position as it
Right.
is right now.
Right.
And then let us know specifically, what is it that we have to do to be able to position any future GIAs so that it will qualify? Because clearly there is a clear path in terms of how GIAs can qualify for NAHASDA funds through the legislative GIA process. We thought we had it very clear, but obviously we didn't. So tell us how that is. And since you are open to amending the housing plan, I'm glad to hear that. So going forward into this legislative session, I'm glad to hear that we will have a good working relationship in this particular area, and we can work together and work coming down on that balance that you have.
Yes.
I think that's very positive for all of our beneficiary communities.
Right. No, absolutely. We have the same goal, which is to get the money to the families that are on the homelands or waiting to get on the homelands.
But first and
the
foremost,
community
yeah, go out
association.
and talk with your beneficiaries about how you can work with them to get NAHASDA funds out and fund those projects.
Okay. So
I think
if I
that's
may.
a great first start.
Okay.
Because they want your help. They want those projects funded. Talk with them. I think that's a really great first start.
Okay.
Okay? Members, any other questions? Because I'm sure I'll have more later. Senators? Okay, if not, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
We're going to take a
committee
brief
members.
recess before we go to DLIR.
We can still say good morning, yes? Okay. Very good. Well,
Good morning, Madam Chair.
good morning.
My name is Linda Chutakayama. I'm the Director of the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations. I'm joined this morning by some of my staff, including Deputy Leonard Hoshijo, Workforce Development Division, Elaine Young and Carol Kanayama, Workforce Development Council, Allison Tasaka, Hawaii's Occupational Safety and Health, also known as HIOSH. Director is Norman Ahu. Wage Standards Program, Pam Martin. Hawaii Civil Rights Commission, William Hoshijo. Hawaii Labor Relations Board, Sesnita Moipono and J.N. Musto. The Unemployment Insurance Division is Linda Uesato. Disability Compensation Division is Joanne Vidinhar. The Labor Industrial Relations Appeal Board, also known as LIRAB, is Danny Vasconcelos. The Research and Statistics Office is Phyllis Dayao. Our ASO is Leila Shar. And Office of Community Services, Rona Suzuki. We also have 4 neighbor island offices, and we also are the agency for the State Fire Council. That's about it.
Okay.
We submitted a narrative to go along with our budget, and I'll just summarize real quickly some of the things that we included. I wanted to highlight for you some of the activities we were engaged in this year, and that includes our Workforce Development Division that solicited and got an award for $3 million in grants for information technology apprenticeships. It's a 3-year grant. We also solicited and were awarded $1.5 million in grants for healthcare, shipyard, and culinary apprenticeships. This past year, apprenticeships were real big with the feds. We also, thanks to the legislature, established a Hawaii Healthcare Workforce Development Advisory Group to identify occupational needs in the healthcare industry and to design programs to fill some of those gaps that we found. Also, thanks to the legislature, we expanded the work of the Agricultural Workforce Development Advisory Board to encourage teachers and students to look at agriculture as a future occupation. We also included as an advisory board one on robotics. And were instrumental, I think, in providing some programs and equipment to schools to introduce robotics among their students. We also, thanks to appropriations provided by the legislature, set up programs for counseling, training, and job referral for workers laid off in Maui as a result of the closing of the HCNS, the Last Sugar Plantation, and the McKenna Resort. We're still working on providing extended benefits for some of those unemployed workers that will go on for a while. If you may recall, the legislature provided an additional 13 weeks of extended benefits. We also were very busy in stepping up enforcement of labor laws to protect workers and to make a more level playing field for businesses. Because of budget cuts in the recent past, maybe not so recent, it was about 2008, 2009, we lost quite a lot of staff, in some divisions as much as 30%. So in order to keep going, we had to curtail the random field audits that we used to do to try to catch those employers who weren't in full compliance with all of our employment laws. You may recall that we had some successful investigations, starting with the one in the Ala Moana Center, EVA section, the new section that they were doing, where a number of folks were not found not to be in compliance. A bigger one was the Miley Sky Court investigation, in which we found a number of violations, and there have been a couple of others, lesser. All told, though, resulting in about $1 million worth of penalties that were assessed. What we found was that not only did the workers receive the benefits and wages to which they were entitled, but employers, the ones who were in compliance, found that they could compete fairly on a level playing field when everybody was doing the right thing. In addition, what we found in working on some of these very aggressive investigations, that the message that was being sent out there, primarily through the press, was that we were watching, and folks weren't going to get away with being out of compliance anymore. So while we have lesser staff, we're trying to make do in enforcement in a different way. So now we are encouraging folks who have knowledge of employers who are out of compliance to call us in and give us the tips for where we can look, because I don't have the manpower to have folks pounding the pavement anymore. And that's been successful so far. Again, a large part was a partnership with the legislature. If you may recall, last year, the legislators were very helpful in passing our request to increase penalties for a number of these kinds of employment laws, to the extent that in some cases where the laws had been on the books for, I don't know, 40 years or so, and the penalty was at $1 a person a day, we're now at $100 per person per day. And it makes a huge difference. And so it no longer is economically feasible for the employers to ignore our laws and be out of compliance, because now when we go after them, it's big money. So in any case, that's worked very successfully for us. The Hawaii economy continues to perform well, but in a way, it's kind of a two-edged sword for us. Our budget is approximately 75% federally funded. And a lot of our federal monies are based on our employment rates. So when we have low unemployment, we actually get less federal funding because we don't need the extra dollars to provide unemployment services, training, and those kinds of things, because presumably more people have jobs. So that being the case, we do have some concerns about some of our divisions that depend on those federal funds. And these will include workforce development. For workforce development, it's actually, they've got two things to worry about. One is the federal funding issue. And we know that federal funding, not only because of the low employment rates, but also because there's a new administration in D.C., and we're not sure how they will view some of the programs that we have in place and whether that funding will continue at the levels they have been in the past. But the second reason why it's a little bit uncertain is there's a new workforce investment law that's being put in place. And again, I don't know how the new administration is going to view this, but two of our divisions, the Workforce Development Division as well as the Workforce Council, have been struggling to put these things in place. One of the biggest differences is that the feds have been trying to institute an atmosphere of competition in the workforce services that are provided. So as a consequence, the sort of one-stop kinds of services that had been provided for dislocated workers in the past has to be competitively bid by the counties. Whereas in the past, that money has used to go straight down to the DLIR's Workforce Development Division, and we had our own staff set up on all of the islands to provide those services. Now it'll be a little less certain. Not sure whether those contracts now are going to be, number one, awarded to us, or number two, whether, even if they were, how long they're going to last. So some of you may recall that last year when we first started this process, and it took a long time to get those contracts put in and bids put in place, we actually had to undergo a RIF. And so we have a little bit of concern about how this is all going to play out, trying to be flexible. So we'll just have to wait and see how all of this occurs, making sure that no matter what happens, that basically the workers or the unemployed persons get the kinds of services they're going to need, even in this era of uncertainty and kind of unpredictable. We're just going to have to do our best. Secondly, the Civil Rights Commission does have 2 federal contracts, primarily to look at discrimination in housing. And we have not been advised that there is going to be any difference in these contracts. But again, there's that uncertainty on the federal level. In the Unemployment Insurance Division, we already are looking at significant declines in federal funding just because of our low unemployment rates. We're estimating now that in FY17, there will be a loss of approximately $750,000 in base funding and 10 full-time positions. We do have a fund that we can turn to, the Special Unemployment Insurance Administration Fund, to cover some of those expenses, but there is a limited amount of money in that fund, and we'll just have to see, how long we can make that last. The good news, I guess, is that we already have stashed away in the Unemployment Trust Fund a total of $523 million, which is sufficient to cover 1 year of unemployment benefits. So that being the case, we have determined that under the formulas that we're required to operate under, the amount of the level of the tax will remain at Schedule C, same as it has been for the last year, and we don't need to make any change there. One of the kind of, I guess, unsung heroes of the department is the Research and Statistics Office. This is the office that really supplies, is the basis for a lot of the data on economics, employment, those kinds of information that run through a lot of the statistics that you see come before you. It's a little bit scary what's happening now because, as you know, the Congress, the federal government actually, has been operating under a continuing resolution for some time now. The last one keeps RNS, Research and Statistics, operating only through April 28th. I'm fairly certain that the Congress will either adopt a full budget or will adopt a new continuing resolution. The scary thing is that I hope it's not going to be too late for RNS because in order to justify their 2018 allocation, there's certain things they need to do prior to that. Certain kinds of mandatory collection and reporting of data. And there's some uncertainty about whether they're going to be able to do that on the limited budget they have right now. So we're kind of taking a look at that. But just so you have an idea of the kinds of things that they're involved in, we have included in our testimony a list of some of those things, and I won't go through all of them right now, but if you glance through them in terms of unemployment statistics, wages, and unemployment information, safety and health statistics, and general workforce information, you can see the kinds of information that they collect that is endemic throughout all the things we look at. And all of their data gets reported up to through the Bureau of Labor Statistics and becomes part of the national database. Okay, now in terms of our budget requests, we tried to keep it very modest, building on what has been done in the past and not, making too big a reach otherwise. And we have listed in our testimony what we are asking for in our priority order. So number one in our priority is a staff person for the PEO responsibility we were given several years ago. You may recall that when we were accepted the responsibility, not that we had a choice, but when we accepted the responsibility, we were given no resources, no staff, nothing. So we've been trying to make do with what we had available in the department and couldn't do a whole lot more in terms of the regulation of this entity, except, collect the paperwork, do the registration. Because PEOs have become such a huge factor in employment, we went from 29 PEOs 2 years ago to 66 now. That's 128% increase. And so quite a number of employees are under the PEO umbrella. I have no idea at this point in time what that situation really is like because we just don't really have the staff to take a close look at how they're being regulated, how they're, to ensure that everything is okay with those kinds of employees. And so we're asking to get started on that with one staffer. Secondly, in the Disability Compensation Division, we are asking for 2 facilitators. The division has had facilitators in the past, but because of the budget reductions, this is one of the divisions that had a 30% reduction way back when. Still struggling to catch up. And so the facilitators were assigned to other kinds of tasks just because we just had to keep the trains running. So what we had a little bit of breathing room this year. So what we did was put those facilitators back on to working with the injured workers, helping them figure out what they needed to do, what the steps were to get compensated, to get their benefits, working on putting the paperwork in the right place at the right time, and just basically making it easier for them to navigate through the system. That really, we found was hugely successful. The amount of time it took to get a claim processed is much faster, get relief for the injured worker, much smoother. The process less adversarial. and the poor injured worker didn't have to feel like they were so inundated and at least knew what was expected of them. So what we're asking for is 2 additional facilitators to continue that process. So then we'd have 4 on the case. And, we have something over 20,000 cases coming in every year. So this will really help that process. Let's see. Office of Community Services. A year ago, we got 25 GIAs, which is a 40% increase over what was assigned in 2015. In addition, 3 CIP GIAs were transferred to us from DAGs. The legislature, I think, seeing that we had such a huge increase, appropriated and authorized 2 positions for OCS in the last session. What we are asking for right now is to embed at least one of them on a recurring basis in our budget. Okay, next, on the Disability Compensation Division again, I think it was 2 years ago, in the last biennium, the legislature had asked that we take a look at disability compensation. This is the division, you may recall, that was totally manual. When we are talking about workers' compensation in particular, it's a real challenge to deal with the paperwork in that division. We have 3 different methods for tracking the cases, none of which talk to each other. So it becomes very difficult. And under the workers' compensation law, each case must be kept available for reopening for 30 years. So there's a massive amount of paperwork. Division's kind of drowning in it. And so the legislature 2 years ago gave us $900,000 to begin to take a look at fixing this issue. We did address it by first calling in a consultant to look at our processes. The thinking being that we do need to digitize at some point, but before we did that, we wanted to streamline how we handled the paperwork, the cases, so that we weren't in a situation where we had garbage in, garbage out. So we have done that by calling in the Gartner Consulting Group, found ways that we could streamline the system, even from the intake of claims, which used to take 4 to 8 weeks, without any further expense or equipment. We managed to cut out some of the unnecessary things in that process, got it down to 2 weeks. In the case of some insurance companies that we work with who are willing to transmit the required forms digitally, we can now intake the claim and get a claim number out there in 2 days. So we're very hopeful about that. There's a lot more to be done, obviously. And so one of the things that we'd like to do is to begin the process of going digital. It will take a period of at least 4 years. We're starting off now and asking for an appropriation to begin that process. It will be in the first year of the biennium, $500,000. In the second year, $2.9 million. We have a detailed breakdown for you on what that money is going to be spent for. We have been in consultation with the CIO, and he has approved the plan. The next item was the Civil Rights Commission. Currently has 4 enforcement attorneys. And what we are asking for here in order to make them a lot more efficient is a legal support staff. And we are suggesting that by giving them the legal support, we can improve productivity by as much as 25%. Somewhat similarly, in our Labor and Industrial Relations Appeal Board, LIRAB, they also could use additional staff to do some of the clerical work, in this case, a clerical office assistant. And we hope to reduce the wait time for injured workers to get their appeals cleared. It's currently running as much as 2 years now. And then finally, our wage standards division. This is the division that handles claims for minimum wage, overtime, child labor, prevailing wage, those kinds of issues. They have a significant backlog that we are trying to deal with. And for them to participate with us in our program of more aggressive enforcement, they really need another labor law enforcement specialist so that they can keep up with our generally more aggressive approach on things. So that's basically our request for the biennium at this point, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay. Thank you. Members, questions? Okay, Senator Schumer.
Thank you. Last year, it came to my attention, I had a constituent that had a really difficult workers' compensation situation where he had been working and I think working for the state, and then he got injured on the job, and he, I think, filed an appeal, and in the appeal he got approved for a certain medical treatment plan, and he was supposed to get, I think, like knee surgery or something like that. But then the employer appealed that, and so because the appeal had been pending, then he couldn't get the treatment he needed, and so he couldn't get the surgery he needed, and it was really bad situation. He had to pretty much stay at home, and it was really, really hard for him to pay bills, and it just went on for like months and months and months, I think almost a year. And so I was just wondering if there's any way, that I was thinking about maybe a bill to say that, if your medical treatment plan gets approved, and if the employer appeals it, they should still have to pay for it while the appeal is pending, so that the person can at least get the treatment they need. And then if the employer prevails, maybe we could make the insurance plan pay, the private insurance, or I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I get these kind of calls every now and then from my constituents that are waiting, and in the meantime they're not getting paid, and they're not getting the treatment they need, and they're in really dire straits.
We hear stories like that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm very distressed by that because, a large part of it is there's a lot of adversity in the system between the various elements. We're trying to resolve some of those things, make the get to conclusion on many of these cases sooner rather than later. And so some of the things that I have mentioned will help to do that. In addition, over the course of the last 6 months or so, we have been working with a group of stakeholders. There was a resolution passed a concurrent resolution adopted by the legislature actually a couple of years ago. And I started the group meeting about 6 months ago. It includes insurers, injured workers, attorneys, everybody who was involved, providers, everybody who's involved in the system, talking over some of the issues that you have touched upon. Some of it is process, some of it is interpretation on how these things are handled. We're trying to address them as they come up and looking for solutions. So the one in particular you are mentioning, we have talked about that some. There is a provision that requires that if an injured worker is currently under some kind of appeal or whatever, theoretically they're supposed to be able to go to their regular health insurer and get coverage for whatever kinds of needs they might have, and then get reimbursed by the insurance company. There's some issues with that because, of course, what the health insurance companies pay is a lot more than what workers' compensation pays. And so we're trying to work some of those kinds of things out. But there are other kinds of problems like that. So, we appreciate being told about, having it rise to that level, throwing it out there for discussion, and trying to figure out what the best way is to handle this that's fair to everybody. But certainly our primary concern is getting the injured worker the relief they need.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, did you have questions?
I know we're going to be able to discuss your, I guess, specifics of your budget later. I think we're setting up a joint briefing with the House, but I didn't hear anything about the ACA waiver. I know that the waiver was just received by the administration, and obviously any funding that was required wasn't included in either your budget or in one of the other departments. But I was under the impression that that part of the waiver is to receive federal monies to help pay the subsidy. Are you going to need an authorization, or are you going to need some seed money?
It's not clear to me yet exactly how that's going to work, or what or if the new administration is going to take any further action on this. Let me at least give you some background on where we are. As you may recall, the ACA requires certain kinds of health insurance, whether it's on a state exchange or on a federal exchange. In the case of Hawaii, we had chosen for the individual and families to go to the federal exchange through DHS. And so that's been going pretty well, and I think there's about maybe 12,000 people or so that have used that option. If they do that, they get qualified for a federal tax credit. In the case of businesses, small businesses specifically, in this past year, they have gotten their insurance in one of two ways. If they decide to go with the ACA plan and get certified for a tax credit, we had a system called direct enrollment, and in which they would enroll in their health plan directly with the insurer. In our case, there was only one who would do that, and that was Kaiser. So they could do it that way. They could get a tax credit. In this past year, the federal government had grandfathered and grandmothered existing plans that were basically our prepaid healthcare plans. And so people could, or businesses could sign up for those plans, but they weren't eligible for tax credits. We had, in the meantime, asked for a waiver from SHOP, and we had indicated to the CMS, the federal government, that if we didn't get the waiver, we were going to send everybody to the federal exchange. I guess it was almost the last day of the year, they granted the waiver. And what the waiver meant was that there would be no direct enrollment, that with the exception of certain kinds of mandated things out of ACA, folks were allowed to sign up for whatever plan they wanted. In lieu of the tax credit, what they gave us was a lump sum which would go to our existing premium supplementation fund. premium supplementation provides a subsidy to certain small businesses. It didn't align perfectly with the ACA, but for whatever reason, the feds decided to allow it. So instead of, small businesses of, 25 employees or less being eligible for the federal tax credit, instead using our rules under prepaid health, you have to be a small business of 7 or fewer employees that met all of the prepaid health care requirements, and you would get a subsidy. And the subsidy was kind of a complicated calculation, so that they agreed to that. They gave us a total in the first year. Well, they didn't give us. I take that back. They authorized a total of $549,000 in the first year. Over the 5-year period of the waiver, it came close to $3 million, I guess. We haven't made a big announcement about this in particular because the money is supposed to come to us from Treasury, not from from HHS. And given the uncertainty with the new administration on the federal side, I didn't want to say anything too big and raise expectations until we had the money in hand.
But they're not expecting us to put the money out first before they send us the money.
No.
I mean, the fund right now, there's not much in that fund.
There's almost nothing. And there's a approximately $1 million waiting list. Now, this new money coming in isn't going to be able to take care of the backlog, but only on a go-forward basis. My understanding is that they're not even anticipating providing us with the funds until later on in the year. So
how's the fund generated now? Is it
by penalties from prepaid health, and they're very low. We have asked in the past for appropriations to replenish the fund, but we've always been denied.
Okay, but you're not asking this year?
No.
Okay.
Unless you want me to.
We can talk about it outside for a hearing.
I can only get rejected so often, and it's depressing.
So, should I go to your questions? Okay. Oh, I guess that just leaves me then. Okay, maybe just a couple questions. I think you mentioned that in the beginning that there were some federal changes, yeah, in terms of workforce development. That's why I believe you were going to have to do some of the transfers that we saw, the 20 positions and the $2 million, right, in terms of from the funds to the county. I think that's what it was.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was a lot of moving back and forth.
There's a bunch of different
personnel, but it all washed out, is my understanding.
Yeah. Is there the capacity to be able to do all of those? I mean, at the county level and everything in terms of all that?
Remains to be seen. What happens on the county level is that they have to issue the RFPs. So they get the money, they issue the RFP, so the money goes out to whatever vendors win the bid. In many instances, in fact, almost all instances, we, as workforce development, are also one of the bidders.
Right, which is a little weird, right?
It's very weird.
Right, so we'll be probably likely the state will be the ones bidding for these.
It will be the state, but we won't be alone. It's competitive.
Right.
So, maybe we'll get it, maybe we won't. It's very uncertain for us too. And we don't know how this is going to play out.
Right. I just want to make sure that, especially with this with these transitions and with these changes, that, you know, from a delivery of service and whatnot, that nothing falls through the cracks.
We're hoping not, but again, you know, if the bid is won by DLIR, we certainly have the personnel and the experience and expertise to continue providing those services. I don't know what happens if somebody new comes on board and wins the bid, and you know, there's nothing. So
and ultimately, then it becomes the county's job to oversee that particular RFP, right?
To some extent, there's also oversight on the part of the Workforce Development Council, which is the new group that Allison is setting up. So she'll be riding herd on them as well. But you know,
and then that's more of a managed competition kind of thing at that point too, right? So I guess DHER can kind of help you all out, but I mean, it's
DHER
if it's a managed competition situation. If another vendor takes over, I guess, a little bit.
No.
Well, nonetheless, I mean, I guess it's an interesting situation. So
it is, and we don't know what to expect either. So we're trying to watch it as closely as we can, try to be as helpful as we can, because ultimately it's our people that you know would be receiving the benefit. Our community people be receiving the benefits. So it's in our best interest to make sure it works well. But
so when's the time frame for when the RFP is supposed to? You're transferring the $2 million, the 20 positions. So when is all this supposed to happen?
No. It's already happening. Okay. It's already happening, and it started last year, and we've been having the dickens of a time because the counties have to issue the RFPs, which they're not used to doing, and making the awards and those kinds of things. So in some cases, we had to scramble at the last moment to try to get extensions of existing contracts done so that the services could continue to be provided while they're in the process of gearing up to do the RFPs. So again, you know, we're trying to work with them as best we can, but it's new for everybody. So.
Okay. Was it the same situation with the BESD funds as well? I think you got to do a bunch of changes with interdepartmental transfers, right, with BESD as well. 12 positions, $1.3 million in TANF funds that you folks had to do as well. Is that a similar situation with federal changes?
Basically, I think it was just a reclassification. The budget and finance said put it considered federal funds, it's U funds because BESD had it as federal funds. It's like double counting within the state.
Okay, and in terms of the maintenance of state maintenance of effort, that's all going to be taken care of through DHS?
Yes. We're like a subcontractor.
Okay. I'll just touch upon little things here and there, and then we can go into questions at a later date. For PEOs, I guess one of the big questions that I have for that, and I know that was touched upon a little bit with some of the other questions in your testimony, you're asking for one position and $33,851 in the first year and $57,685, second year. But when we did testimony on the bill that we had last year, Senate Bill 2544, I think it was testified at that time in the hearing, I think at Senate CPC committee, you folks testified that you needed upwards of $315,338 for the course of the biennium. In fact, I think at one point it might have been annually that you might have needed that money. It was estimated that it might have been anywhere from 2 to 3 staff people. So how did it go from needing over $300,000 either annually or for the course of the biennium? It was really hard to tell from the verbal and written testimony because there were accounts of both, to needing maybe, and again, it's hard to tell because if you're going special funded and the bill would reflect a special fund, then $300,000 you'd be looking at incorporating the fringe and everything else. So I get that. But even still, if you're looking at your request, which is general funds, still don't match up, because even if you included the fringe costs, way bigger number with what you're testifying to what you're requesting in the budget. So,
Well, we, first of all, have rethought,
Okay.
you know, what we needed on an initial basis, because, you know, and so we're a little bit less ambitious, I guess, in terms of what we're looking at this point. So we thought what we would do is start with a single staffer in the first go round, and then build up to that as we have a clearer idea of what and how we will do this. It does make a difference as to what we will be, or how the money will be coming to us, whether general fund or special fund, and that makes kind of a difference. We're also looking at how we might make sure that the amount of the registration fee, which may have to be tweaked at some point, can pay for the cost of the program itself, thinking that we would want to have a program that's sustainable. So we would start with this single staffer who would work on developing the program, as opposed to, you know, going full blown at the very get-go. It may well be that eventually it will come to 2 or 3 staffers. I would think so, particularly with the kind of growth we're seeing in PEOs. If that continues on that upward trend, we will have to devote a lot more attention to it. But we're just trying to be conservative now and starting with 1.
because I think that I think conservative was always the thought, even with the bill. Right now in fees, I think you bring in about $34,250 a year in fees based upon your testimony. It goes into the general fund at this particular point. I think even looking at the testimony, all the PEOs were willing to look at some kind of level of increase, even looking at some kind of scaffolding in terms of the fee structure, so that the bigger ones would get, obviously, would bear more of the cost versus the little mom and pop small ones, right? And so I think looking at that, you could probably look at some kind of sustainable system that would have given you a decent revenue stream that could have sustained some operation, probably more than 1 staff person. But I would strongly suggest that even now you take a look at what that potentially could look like. I thought that might have been what you all were doing during this interim, given the discussions that took place last session after the bill.
We have done that, and we can provide you with our analysis of what that fee could or should be. We have it broken down in tiers. So, for instance, if you know, the fee were to be based on a certain payroll amount, what it would be, you know, at different levels, and how that would sustain a staff of 2 people, actually, either through the general fund or special fund.
Right,
and
also
happy
more
to share that with
yeah,
you.
if you could share that with us, but also more importantly, because I think one of the issues that you all raised was the method of tracking, you know, in terms of the identifier and getting that information, because I think some of the hitching points was being able to track the data.
Oh, yes.
You know, without compromising any or having issues based upon, you know, if an employee works only a certain amount, less than a day or whatnot, and, you know, not disincentivizing temporary type employees. There was all kinds of issues floating around based upon the conversations I recall that took place during the testimony. But I think we can revisit that and again look for something a little bit more sustainable in terms of the situation. I know that's discussions typically that take place in DCCA, but nonetheless, it's in your wheelhouse. So I think that's the kind of discussion we now have to have in terms of a self-sustaining unit. So we can continue that discussion. Similarly with GIAs, then, if we can jump to that. So you are looking to, I know you filled, I believe, one of the 2 positions. Is that correct? Or no? We gave you 2 positions last year for grants management. You've established, have you filled or established any of the 2 positions?
I think both of those positions are established. One of them we were about to fill, but she left, right? I don't know where Roma is.
Okay.
Because it took too long. But
Okay.
anyway, we are now
So one's been
prepared to fill-
established but vacant. Is that what it is? Okay, so 2 established but vacant. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, just very recently, and so
Okay.
we want to make one of them embedded in the budget as a recurring.
Okay, so you'd like to, of the 2, you'd like to have
At
one in
least
the
one.
base? Okay. And you think that for now at least could give you some traction in terms of making it a little bit more consistent in terms of the application of GIAs for the administration? That's the thought.
For the administration?
In terms of how the administration carries out the grant, the GIA program.
Well, it makes it
For you, or at least for you folks.
possible for the grant, the GIAs that DLIR has.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about all of the GIAs, which there's been some discussion
Mm-hmm.
about whether they should all be consolidated or at least conform with each other, we have suggested that DLIR could be amenable to being the repository of that, but it would require additional staff and other kinds of expenses. We do have a breakdown of what we would need in order to do all of that. We're happy to share that with you as well. But the 2 staff people we have been talking about really applies just to the additional GIAs we already got.
That's
So
just the
for-
ones that are already attached to your
already assigned to
department.
us, yeah.
Okay.
So if we're talking about the full 100, it's usually about 100. We're talking about the full 100. 2 is not going to be enough. And so we can give you the breakdown of what we think we would
If you
need.
could give us that breakdown. As of right now, are you aware of there being any point in this for the administration in terms of a GIA person? Because previously, I think we had worked with Laurel, the Deputy Chief of Staff, as kind of a point for the governor on GIAs, but we don't have a Deputy Chief of Staff at this particular point. I think they've at least temporarily assigned one of the people in their office. I'm not even sure what our position is. Upstairs.
I'm not aware.
But usually we get lots of calls after GIAs go out saying, who do we talk to in the governor's office? And I'm sure that'll still be the case. And you don't want a lone receptionist upstairs to be fielding tons and tons of calls on GIAs and then calling every single department who will then be completely lost. Is there a point in the administration for GIAs specifically to answer calls in terms of what's the next step?
I'm not aware, but I will find out.
Okay. 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 And in terms of just a quick question on in looking at your vacancies, I think there's one little mistake on the Labor Relations Board. If you look at Table 12, it says here the chair has been vacant since 2000, July 1st, 2000. I'm pretty sure that.
Oh, that's wrong.
I'm pretty sure it's 2016.
It is vacant now, but
They
that's
may
only
feel
been-
like it's been a long time since they've lost their friend, but it's not been that long, right? So,
No, I think Carrie left at the end of November.
okay. And so I know that it's a lot of work there. When is the appointment, I guess, would be taking place?
I'm sorry, I don't know that. That appointment will be made by the governor's office.
Okay. Because as of right now, I mean, I guess that's a lot of work there. I believe there was a request for an additional staff as well, as I recall. Attorney? Was it for
Was it for an attorney?
Or
No, it was a
a
support staff.
Support staff. I think attorney was for someone. Staff attorney,
Staff
right?
attorney.
Okay, these guys would know. So as of right now, you guys are doing some of the opinions on the staff work or opinions on your own, right?
We always have to
Right.
speak for says needed myself. And we are fully prepared to continue on,
Right.
by the way,
Right.
even in the absence.
But I'm sure that getting that appointment will be much appreciated as well. So, okay. Well, I'm sure we'll have other questions, but it's been a very long day, so we'll continue our questions as session goes forward, and I know subject matter will continue to have briefings as well. So if my very important and lone WAM member left does not have any further questions. Senator? No?
No.
Okay, then thank you very much. We're adjourned.